My 50-year-old husband cheated 4 times. Married for 30 years, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. My heart was in turmoil, struggling with how to live the remaining days without regret. But then I heard his heartfelt confession, "In my life, I have loved 5 women. The beautiful ones were too greedy, the smart ones too calculating, the young ones immature, the passionate ones demanding without limits. Only Eleanor was proper and balanced. She is the one I loved most. The key is that she loved me deeply and never doubted me. It was this trust that indulged me, allowing me to have children with other women outside." Hearing this, I wiped the tears from my face. Since he loved so many women, I decided to find them all and send him off on his final journey. I went to the hospital to get the medical report for my husband, with whom I have been in love for 30 years. The doctor told me he had cancer and only had 5 years to live. I was originally planning to tell him this bad news and then call our son and daughter back from abroad to keep him company during his remaining days. However, I unexpectedly heard his true feelings and found out that he had been cheating all these years. I immediately decided to hide his illness and expose his ugly face in front of the children. Then, I would find all the women he had been involved with one by one and send him off on his final journey, so that he would have no regrets in the afterlife. I asked myself if I had ever wronged him in these years, and I truly couldn't understand why he would cheat, and cheat 4 times at that. Now that I think about it, by breaking the vow to stay with his beloved for 100 years, heaven has shortened his remaining life to 5 years. This punishment is cruel but fair. Richard and I fell in love in school. I got into university, but he didn't, so he chose to work. Later, after I graduated, he asked me to give up the job I was assigned and start a business with him. For the sake of our love, I resolutely followed him into the unknown. Those years were full of business opportunities everywhere. The 2 of us were optimistic about the clothing market, so we opened a garment factory. Richard was good at socializing, and I was good at management. Our family business gradually grew from a small workshop with just a dozen people into an outstanding local enterprise. But later, for the sake of our children, I chose to return home and became someone who only knew about daily necessities. Meanwhile, Richard forgot his original intention and became lost in a world of comfort and indulgence. After many years, when I returned to work at the factory, I unexpectedly ran into the older brother William who had once guided me in business. He awkwardly took out an IOU note and said, "Sorry, Eleanor, I went bankrupt and can only come to you for help." 30 years ago, I saved his father. To thank me, he gave me 200,000 yuan. At that time, I needed money to start my business, so I wrote him an IOU. Later, when I repaid him, he refused to accept it. After I returned to family life, we lost contact, and the matter of the loan was left unresolved. At that time, everyone was poor, and 200,000 was not a small amount. Since he generously helped me when I was in poverty, I should repay him generously when he is in difficulty. So, I gave him 1 million. William grabbed my hand and insisted on writing an IOU for me, but I firmly refused. Richard suddenly appeared and tore William's hand away. "William, this is a public place. You pulling and tugging with my wife here has been seen by the staff, and it doesn't look good." How had I never realized before how hypocritical Richard is? His face was smiling, but inside he was cursing non-stop. "Damn it, William, it's not enough that you stole my lover, now you want to steal my wife too. That bitch Vivian is just money hungry. I gave her 100,000 a month, but she thought it was too little and actually went to hook up with William. That slut who can be had with money, I've been with her for 2 years, and William doesn't mind the dirt either, he even married her and made her his wife." Seeing Richard wanted to chase him away, I immediately rushed over to stop him. "Honey, you misunderstood. William only came to me for help with something." After calming Richard down, I said to William, "William, long time no see. I'm hosting today. Tonight, bring your wife along, and let's have dinner together." Richard immediately perked up when he heard he could see Vivian, agreeing eagerly, yes, let's have dinner together tonight." I booked a private room at the largest hotel in town to entertain William and his wife. Richard arrived late, and the moment he saw Vivian, he was frozen in place. He thought to himself, how is this woman almost 50 and still so beautiful, with such a great figure? William really got lucky. And look at my own wife, she never dresses up or takes care of herself, always busy in the kitchen, making me not even want to take her out. Vivian gave him a sharp look. I felt a surge of anger but held it back. Richard wasn't upset either, just as I knew him, he masked his feelings well and warmly greeted William and his wife. I heard William has had some difficulties these past few years. Why didn't you come to me? We're all friends, and I would never refuse to help where I can. If $1 million isn't enough, just say so. I don't have money to spend myself, but I always prioritize my big brother first. Vivian looked at him with a dumbfounded expression, then got up to go to the bathroom. Richard used the excuse of checking on the food and followed her out. Afraid of missing the good part, I quietly followed them out. Then I heard Richard's inner voice, although Vivian is no longer young, she still has charm. When she comes out, I'll ask her if she wants to do it for $10,000 a time. As expected, after he asked, Vivian slapped him. Richard, you're such a scumbag. If you hadn't pretended to be single to deceive me back then, I wouldn't have been with you. Luckily, my husband told me the truth. Don't put it so nicely. You just liked William because he was richer than me, Richard teased. Now I'm richer than him. Why not come back to me? If Vivian had only been with William for money, she would have left long ago. Obviously, Richard misjudged her. The fact that she can endure hardships with her husband shows that she is after true love. Richard was slapped by Vivian and wanted to fight back, but Vivian was no fool. She immediately changed her expression and told Leroy to follow her to the women's restroom. She said with ill intent, there are fewer people over there, you can do whatever you want. Richard thought there was an opportunity to take advantage, his eyes immediately shining, and he followed Vivian eagerly. After arriving at the women's restroom, Vivian locked him in a stall and ran off. Richard had liver cancer, and liver cancer patients can't endure the cold. I turned the air conditioning in the restroom to the lowest setting, locked the restroom door from the inside, washed my hands, and then returned to the dining table. Vivian asked me where I was going, and I said to the restroom. Her face instantly turned pale. She touched William with her hand, and the couple talked for a while, then distractedly finished their meal. Afterwards, William apologized to me. He said that he had hidden Richard's affair at first because I had just given birth, and the family relied on Richard. He was afraid I would suffer if I divorced, so he could only persuade Vivian to turn back. Fortunately, Vivian was also deceived, which ended up creating a good fate for the two of them. Vivian also sent me a text message. It was the address of a small restaurant. She said, this woman Fiona used to be a worker at your factory, and now she owns this place. She and Richard seem to have had a child together. Since the child is related to property, you should go and take a look. I'm not ungrateful, I replied to both couples with thanks. Holding the restaurant address, I went to the place. It was just mealtime, so I went in and ordered a bowl of fried rice. Fiona's son Kevin was on the phone with Richard. The restaurant was crowded, so he put the call on speaker. Kevin said he was about to graduate and wanted to start a business, asking Richard to sponsor him with $500,000. $500,000 is not a small amount, Richard could afford it, but he might not want to give it. After all, this illegitimate son was about to graduate, and Richard still hadn't arranged a job for him, which showed that he didn't value this son. Sure enough, he refused. After Kevin hung up the phone, he immediately lost his temper. Mom, what kind of father did you find for me? He's so stingy. Such a big company, and he can't even come up with $500,000. Fiona patted his shoulder and comforted him. He's not your biological father. When I was trying to find a dad for you, I worked hard. If he won't give $500,000, then ask for $100,000. Just ask a few more times. Remember to be sweet-talking. Kevin asked, "Mom, why did you like him in the first place?" "As far as I know, he has a family and won't marry you." Fiona said, "I went to work at his factory, and he harassed me every day." "Wasn't he just eager to be tricked by me?" "It's better that he has a family because that way he can give money without living with us. Otherwise, if he finds out you're not his biological son, we're finished." After hearing her set of excuses, I also felt that Richard deserved it. Living a double life in constant fear, only to find out the child he painstakingly raised was someone else's. He thought it was an honor to have children with another woman behind my back, but others saw him as a fool eagerly being used. I wonder if Richard will be so angry he might die when he finds out the truth. I'm really looking forward to the scene where the fake father and son recognize each other, so I secretly kept Fiona's contact information. By some twist of fate, I actually found 2 of the 4 people. When I got home, Richard frowned deeply, his eyes fixed on me from start to finish. I was very curious about what he was thinking. So, holding back my nausea, I warmly ran into his arms and embraced him. "Honey, what's wrong with you today? I feel like you're not very happy." He told me it was because of the heavy work pressure that made him anxious, but in his heart, he kept nagging endlessly about matters of the lower body. If Melanie didn't look like a younger version of Eleanor back then, I wouldn't have gotten involved with her. Unfortunately, Melanie has been with me for so many years that she's long past the age to get married. It's all my fault for spoiling her too much over the years, spoiling her without any restraint. She insists I marry her, and if I don't, she comes to cause trouble. What am I supposed to do? Maybe I should find someone to chase after her, so she'll take the initiative to break up with me. There are plenty of bachelors at the factory. If I package them up a bit, I don't believe Melanie won't fall for one. A talented young man in his early 30s is definitely better than me, a 50-year-old old man with a family. Compared to the willful Melanie, I still like Eleanor the most. Sigh, it's been a long time since I was intimate with Eleanor. I'll take good care of her later. When we were sleeping, Richard clung to me like a stubborn sticker. Just thinking about how old he is and still playing these substitute games makes me want to vomit. I pushed him away. Faced with my first rejection, he was a bit stunned. I said I was too tired. On the surface, he told me to rest well, but deep down, he was complaining about me. Women at this age get tired so easily. Forget it, I'll go find Melanie tomorrow anyway, they all look about the same. Although she's willful, at least she's young. The next day, Richard was out hustling all day. When he came back at night, I felt he was pretty tired too. It really is because of age. To get rid of Melanie, Richard found her a worker at the factory, a man in his early 30s, handsome, sweet-talking, and emotionally intelligent. He constantly charmed the female workers at the factory, but his lifestyle was bad. He liked eating, drinking, gambling, and womanizing, so he still hadn't married. Richard lent him the Maybach at home in an unused villa, letting him persuade Melanie to go back to her hometown to get married. Once it was done, he would give him 300,000 yuan. Richard said to him, "I don't care how your life goes from now on, but this woman is crazy enough to risk her life. You must not betray me." With a bride delivered to his door and money handed over, Gary was of course willing, nodding repeatedly and promising William that he would never betray him, even unto death. If Vivian and Fiona's destruction of other people's families had some unspeakable reasons, then Melanie was purely a willing participant. I have no interest in sympathizing with a woman who destroys her own family. Her matters, I am not prepared to interfere with. I just need to let things develop naturally, then find the right moment to tell Melanie the truth, letting her and Richard fight like dogs while I reap the benefits. As Richard expected, Melanie took the bait. Gary took 3 months off from the company, and when he returned, he was already in the process of resigning. He said he was going back to his hometown to get married. The workers who were close to him teased him, wanting to see his wife, and he didn't hide it, only saying that his wife was someone he had tricked into coming home, that she was already pregnant, and if they wanted to see her, they would have to wait until after she gave birth. I looked through his employment information and noted down his home address. Among the 4 women Richard cheated with, the beautiful one was Vivian, the smart one was Fiona, the young one was Melanie, and there was another passionate one, but to this day I have found no clues about her. After several attempts to probe, Richard didn't reveal a single detail in his heart or words. I can only guess that the two probably haven't been in contact for a long time. I originally wanted to keep looking. But then my son and daughter suddenly returned from abroad, and I didn't want them to be deceived by Richard like I was. So I decided to directly lift the veil off this so-called happy marriage. I booked a table at a hotel to welcome my son and daughter back. While they were eating, I personally drove to Gary's house to pick up Melanie, who was 3 months pregnant. Melanie isn't the type to act with ulterior motives, she's mostly emotional. Knowing she was being set up by her partner, she came in ready for a desperate fight. She grabbed a knife and chased after Richard, slashing at him. "Damn you, Richard. I've known you since I was 20. I didn't even marry you just to be with you, but you schemed against me and made me marry a penniless, worthless man. Today, I'm going to kill you, then kill myself. On the road to the afterlife, I'll drag you down to hell with me." My son and daughter were shocked and speechless to learn that Richard was cheating and scheming against the other woman. But after all, he's their own father. Fearing someone might get hurt, they all stood up to urge Melanie not to act impulsively. However, Melanie wouldn't listen at all. Her fighting spirit was so strong that she chased Richard until he fainted, finally ending the farce. She herself had suffered multiple miscarriages due to countless falls and ended up in the hospital. When Richard woke up, he looked at me with a face full of guilt. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. Cheating was my fault. It's just because I love you so much that when you're not around, I look for someone who looks like you to keep me company." His words were nothing short of an insult to love. I asked him again, "What about Vivian? She doesn't look like me at all, so why were you with her?" His eyes flickered nervously, and he stammered, "At that time, you were pregnant. I'm a man, and when I have needs, I have to find someone to satisfy them. Vivian is pretty, and I couldn't resist for a moment. I crossed the line." I sneered coldly, "So you tasted the sweetness and couldn't stop yourself. Wherever you went, you wanted to cheat, being with all kinds of people just for the thrill of something new. Then after playing around, you realized it's only me who doesn't ask for anything from you and even silently supports you, so you love me the most." After hearing my words, he panicked and cried, begging me not to divorce him. I looked at his increasingly aged face and sneered coldly, "Don't worry, Richard, I won't divorce you." Upon receiving my answer that I wouldn't divorce him, his guilt immediately vanished, replaced by secret delight in his heart. I knew she was just trying to scare me. After all these years of marriage, she simply can't live without me. This little scene today was just her way of wanting me to love her a bit more. My friends around me who have cheated and been found out by their wives still don't dare to divorce. Some even manage to bring their mistresses home to live with them. I haven't done that, so I'm already being fair to her. I just can't stand people who betray me, it feels so satisfying. I immediately took out his medical report and placed it in front of him. "Forgot to tell you, you're dying soon. Divorce and splitting assets would be such a hassle. I've decided to wait until you die and then divide the inheritance directly." He looked at the medical report in disbelief and said, "What? How can this be? I'm clearly very healthy. How could I have cancer?" To prove that he was healthy, Richard underwent several more tests, but all were in vain. The test results repeatedly left him disheartened. Melanie lived in the same hospital as him. When she heard he was diagnosed with liver cancer, even after having an abortion and while receiving 4 fluids, she came over to mock him. Her voice was loud and clear, "Oh dear, Richard, I heard you're about to die soon. Truly, what goes around comes around, no one is spared by heaven. Don't feel bad, everyone dies eventually, some just later than others, and you just happen to die earlier. It's a pity we're not in the same ward, otherwise, I'd set up a bed right next to you to watch how you gasp your last breath." Richard asked me to kick Melanie out. I rolled my eyes at him. I didn't even cheer for it, and he still wanted to stop me from kicking her while she was down. My son and daughter were originally disgusted by Richard's infidelity, but after learning about his illness, all that remained was pity. They even came to persuade me to forgive Richard. My son said, "Mom, Dad hasn't had it easy all these years. He's been working hard with social engagements from dawn till dusk for this family. Look at how much money he's left for you. For his sake, just forgive him. Let's spend the rest of our days together as a family." My daughter also chimed in beside me. "Yes, Mom, Dad was so upset by that crazy woman that he ended up in the hospital and can't even get out of bed now. He's already been punished enough, so just let it go." I said passionately, even if he died because of that woman, I still couldn't let it go. He didn't cheat just once, but 4 times. How do you expect me to forgive him? At first, when I found out Richard cheated, I didn't hate him so much. But after hearing his true feelings, he made me feel completely disgusted. A person like that, forget about being close to death. Even if he lost his hands and feet, went blind, deaf, and mute, he wouldn't deserve forgiveness. I don't blame my son and daughter for feeling sympathy for him. After all, Richard is very good at pretending. Even I was deceived by him for 30 years. I called Fiona and asked her to bring Kevin over to see Richard off. Fiona is very sharp. When she heard Richard was about to die, she rushed to the hospital with her son without delay. She demanded Richard give her 2 million. It was clear that Richard didn't like this woman very much, not even the child she had. But this woman was smart and didn't ask for much. 2 million was just a drop in the bucket for Richard. However, her impatience was not a good thing. Asking for money from someone who just found out they don't have long to live is no different from urging them to die. Sure enough, Richard got angry and grabbed a glass, smashing it towards Fiona's face. "I'm not dead yet, and you're already after my inheritance. I won't give you a single cent." His long-suppressed feelings surfaced again. "Back then, because of the stress at work, I just wanted to find a woman to vent on. Damn bad luck, I hit the jackpot the first time. Kevin, that kid, is just like his mother, scheming and greedy. I don't like him at all. But when his mother gave birth, she never told me, only made me pay child support. I'm just a sucker." Later, after Fiona said something to him, Richard actually agreed to give the money. My pair of children immediately became unhappy, insisting that the money in the family was earned by Richard and me together, so why should an illegitimate child outside the family get a share? Richard now not only resented others asking him for money but also resented others meddling in his finances. He said angrily, "The money is mine, and I can give it to whoever I want. Kevin is my child just like you all. Our family has billions in assets, so what if he only wants 2 million? I heard that cancer patients shouldn't be provoked, or it could worsen their condition. But right now, I wish he would die soon. So I took out the paternity test and said to Richard, Kevin is not your biological son. Fiona is with you just because she wants you to help raise the child." Richard looked at the paternity test repeatedly, clutching his chest, breathing heavily. He wanted to strangle Fiona, but when he tried to stand up, his body uncontrollably collapsed straight to the ground. Fiona was terrified, staring at me blankly. I asked her, "Does Richard have another woman outside?" "How did you know?" She was terrified. I pressed her, "Tell me everything you know, or I'll make you pay back all the money you've spent over the years." I guessed that Richard suddenly agreeing to give her 2 million must mean Fiona had some leverage over him. Fiona weighed the pros and cons and decided to tell me everything she knew. She said that Richard had a client who couldn't conceive, so she asked Richard to donate sperm, and she successfully gave birth to a son. The child was very smart, and Richard had high hopes for him. She said, "Which parent doesn't want to have an outstanding child?" Richard once mentioned wanting to give the company to that child to win his favor, but the child's adoptive father was wealthier, so he refused. She said, "I once saw him transfer over 10 million to that child to please him, but after the child received it, he returned the money." When the son and daughter heard this, their faces darkened. Richard had never been so generous to them before. The person who used to advise me to be tolerant has now also started to become narrow-minded. The daughter said, "How can Dad be like this? Even if none of us are as outstanding as that child, we were raised right by his side from childhood. Doesn't he have any feelings for us? And he even wants to give the company to someone else. Is he losing his mind?" The son said, "Dad plans to give the money and the company to his other son, completely disregarding us. I don't even dare to think about it now. If that person accepts Dad, will we be kicked out of the house by him?" Thanks to the doctor's efforts, Richard finally woke up. Fiona, afraid that Richard would wake up and ask her for money, took Kevin and left. Since Melanie found out Richard had cancer, she hasn't returned home after being discharged. She found a job as a caregiver in the hospital and comes over every few days to mock Richard, claiming that after being his bed partner for 15 years, she would take care of him in his old age. Now, hearing that Richard has been raising someone else's child for 20 years, she rushed over to watch the spectacle. Just opening her mouth could make someone furious. She said, "If I had known you liked helping others so much, Richard, I should have had a child for you to raise. To be honest, I hadn't even broken up with my boyfriend when I was with you. That boyfriend was tall, handsome, and graduated from a top university. Maybe the child would have been smart too, perfectly meeting your standards. At first, I was with you just to make some money, planning to marry my boyfriend after graduation. Who would have thought he found out and even broke up with me? I'm used to a life of luxury and extravagance, so I didn't want to leave you. When I mentioned marriage to you, it was just to get some money. But you're so stingy and even had someone scheme against me." Melanie glanced at my son and daughter and clicked her tongue. "Do you want to have these two do a paternity test as well? What if they're not really yours?" Leroy was so angry that he fainted again. The doctor came over to resuscitate him. After a hard time waking him up, the moment he opened his eyes, he forced his son and daughter to take a paternity test. The daughter asked him, "Dad, are you crazy? You've done so many wrong things, how can you have the nerve to turn around and doubt Mom?" Richard emphasized, "What do you know? You can know a person's face but not their heart. If you see yourself as dirty, you see everyone else as dirty." My son and daughter felt this was an insult to me and firmly refused to do a paternity test, which led to arguments between him and the children. He said that refusing to do it was unfilial, that he wouldn't leave the family money to them in the future, and that they would starve outside on their own. He accused them of being incapable and unable to support themselves, still relying on their parents at their age. He scolded my son so harshly that his heart turned cold. Looking at me, he shook his head and said, "Forget it, I still have research projects to work on. Since Dad doesn't trust us, there's no need for me to waste time here." My son said goodbye to me. "Mom, I'm leaving first. If there's anything else later, just give me a call." My daughter also said, "Before, Dad was reluctant to spend money on me. I thought he favored boys over girls, but then I saw that my brother wasn't doing well either, so I didn't think much of it. Now it seems he values the son outside the family, not the ones at home. Mom, I'm leaving too. Instead of wasting time being upset, I'd rather go out and earn more money so Dad won't look down on me for relying on him." "All right, both of you go back. I'm here, and I'll make sure to manage the money well for you." I sent my son and daughter away. For the remaining days, let Richard and me torment each other. Fiona has been to this hospital, Melanie is stationed here permanently, and so am I. I can't get in touch with that client who borrowed the sperm, but I can still call Vivian. Perhaps Vivian was the first person to dump Richard. Every time Richard saw Vivian, his mouth and heart were full of filthy words. Vivian heard that Richard was dying soon and was quite happy to come and watch the drama. She said to Richard, "Richard, whether you believe it or not, when I broke up with you back then, it really wasn't because I thought you were less wealthy than my husband. I became the other woman because you deceived me. When I found out you had a family, my first reaction was to break up with you. As for my husband, he is responsible, has a sense of duty, works hard, is loyal to our marriage, and even if he had nothing, I would stay by his side for life, never leaving. I heard Vivian has recently been following William around the market. Her actions have already proven that what she said is true. Melanie suddenly appeared out of nowhere and launched into a tirade at Richard. Richard, did you understand what Vivian meant? If not, let me explain it to you. She said she was with you because you deceived her, and that you are a man without responsibility, without a sense of duty, not hardworking or ambitious, and unfaithful to marriage. The women around you are only with you because of your wealth, and they are all scheming against you. So now that you're sick, everyone is secretly hoping you die. Richard was so angry with her that he was no longer dizzy, he just told her to get lost. Everyone else had left, only Richard and I were sitting in the hospital room, silently looking at each other. I was about to peel an apple for myself when he suddenly grabbed my hand holding the knife. Eleanor, if I had nothing just like William, would you leave me? I laughed disdainfully. Back when we were together, you had nothing too. I had just graduated from college with a bright future ahead, and many people were after me. Did I leave you? He released my hand with relief, and I immediately poured a bucket of cold water on him. The Eleanor back then wouldn't leave Richard, but the me now would leave you. Not only would I leave, I would watch you suffer unbearably, only then could I ease the hatred in my heart. After venting the anger in my heart, I heard Richard's inner voice again. He said in his heart, none of these women can be relied on, but fortunately, I still have a son. He is my favorite and I treat him the best. I believe he won't abandon me. The son he was talking about is Ethan, the sole heir of the famous family conglomerate. At just 18, he had already completed all his university courses ahead of time and is now gaining experience in the company, preparing to take over. Richard, afraid that I would bully his lonely son, deliberately called him in front of me. Ethan, Dad is sick. Can you come to the hospital to see me? On the phone, Ethan said, if you're sick, go get treated. Stop bothering me. Besides, you're not my dad. It was clear that this son really didn't want to deal with him. Sitting beside them, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Then Richard suddenly stood up and slapped me. You bitch, how dare you laugh at me? What right do you have to laugh at me? You've been living off me all these years, eating my food and drinking my water. I just had an affair, is that such a big deal? I raised my hand and slapped him back. Richard, stop pretending to enjoy the benefits while cursing behind my back. If it weren't for my efforts, the family factory wouldn't be where it is today. I returned to the family for the sake of the children, and they are your children too. Richard sneered, I never asked you to give birth. I have my own son. Those two ungrateful brats you gave birth to, I'm not even sure if they're really mine. Seeing Richard fall to this point, I had already calmed down. If he had just sincerely apologized and begged me, I might have let him leave with some dignity. But that slap made me realize that some people are not worth sympathizing with. I hired Melanie to be Richard's caregiver. She didn't disappoint me, meals were always served cold, and cleaning was only done when Richard was asleep. After a few rounds of torment that broke Richard down, he went to the hospital to complain. Then Melanie just quit her job, going full-time to torment him. In the end, Richard couldn't bear it any longer and actually called to threaten Ethan. He said, Ethan, if you don't come to see your dad, Dad will come find you. On the other end, there was a loud click as the phone was hung up, clearly showing impatience. While Richard was asleep, I took note of Ethan's number and secretly sent him a message. Ethan, I am Richard's wife, he is dying soon. Ethan asked to meet me. I had only heard of Ethan before, but seeing him in person truly surprised me. He was tall, handsome, and young, a genuine golden child. As soon as he sat down, he got straight to the point and said he wanted to make a deal with me. Ethan asked me to take Richard to the family hospital. He said he would have someone watch over Richard to prevent him from revealing his true identity. Compared to the Jiang family, my family's assets were truly meager. To Ethan, Richard was not like a father but more like a threat. Only by keeping Richard under his watchful eye could he feel at ease. Richard and I have long grown to detest each other. Handing him over to Ethan, while also gaining a favor, is something I welcome. I arranged the hospital transfer for Richard. As soon as he arrived at the new hospital, he was put under supervision. Richard panicked and asked me what I intended to do to him. I said, "Your son asked me to bring you here. If you have any issues, you can go directly to him." Richard glanced at the bodyguards and dared not speak, but his mind kept racing. Ethan warned me that if a fourth person learns about his background, he would lock me up and deny me freedom for life. But I'm his biological father, what right does he have to treat me like this? Richard struggled to leave the room but was surrounded by several bodyguards. They said, "Sorry, sir, unless Ethan agrees, you will never leave this ward in your lifetime." Richard asked, "When will Ethan come?" The bodyguards replied, "Mr. Jiang won't be coming." Richard immediately collapsed to the ground. I couldn't help but find it amusing. Richard was nearly dead, his freedom gone, and Ethan, that kid, was really ruthless. Afterwards, Ethan had someone remind me to be cautious with my words and actions. I understood his meaning, so I took the initiative to propose selling the family factory and going abroad to join my children, hoping he could help me get a good price. Not long after, I received a huge sum of money, enough to buy 10 factories. A year later, I received news of Richard's death. I heard that being imprisoned for so long caused his emotions to collapse, his condition deteriorated rapidly, and when he died, there was no one by his side. Looking back now, I realize that heaven has still favored me. If I hadn't heard Richard's true feelings, I would never have known about his infidelity. I might have even felt sorrow over his death. Now, his passing is not a source of pain for me, but a release.